We want to bring in yet again our friend and colleague there, former federal prosecutor and legal analyst, Neama Rahmani. He joins us. Neama, good to see you here. You were somewhat preempted by all of that going on in Los Angeles, but you're here with us, and we thank you for it. Thank you for sticking around. I got to ask first about Santos. 87 months, it's about, what, 7 years, 3 months in federal prison. Do you think that is commensurate with what he was convicted for?
I do, Andrew, and this is why. Here's someone who engaged in a variety of pretty brazen frauds, and you touched upon some of it: the unemployment fraud, identity theft, credit card fraud, campaign finance violations, getting funds from the RNC because he said he was eligible for matching funds and that type of support. So this is someone that really violated the law in every way possible. And I think one thing the judge focused on, Andrew, was really his lack of remorse, how he handled himself publicly. He was obviously expelled from Congress, and he was doing cameos. He was on social media. He's making money, but he didn't make any effort to make restitution or to repay the government or the other victims that he stole from. And I think, when you go before a judge, they really want to see that remorse, that acceptance of responsibility, someone that acknowledges that what he did was wrong, especially when you're in a position of power. You're a former member of Congress. So I think ultimately it was a 70 to 87-month range. The government recommended the high end of that range. Santos's lawyers were recommending 2 years. That's the statutory minimum, the lowest the judge could go. And I don't think that was going to happen given the facts and circumstances of this case.
Yeah, he also got 2 years of supervised release, which I thought was interesting. Yeah, prosecutors had said earlier, it seemed like they got everything they wanted here, and they did take a victory lap. Our viewers heard that this morning. I want to talk about some of these maybe hypothetical scenarios, maybe not so hypothetical. We're about to hear from some of these defenders of Santos, and they're not many, but we're going to hear from some of them in just a bit here. And they kind of brought up the P word, pardon. Do you think that's going to be on the table at all? I mean, just because Santos, he's a Trump supporter, he's a Trump ally, but it's not like everyone who's convicted of a crime who's a Republican gets a pardon from a Republican president in office at the time, right, Neama?
Not necessarily, but with this president, Andrew, you never know. And there are a lot of individuals that are trying to curry favor with President Trump. Folks like Sam Bankman-Fried, his certainly loyalties were not to the Republican Party. He was a pretty big Democratic donor, and he's trying to curry favor with him and cozy up to him. And I wouldn't be surprised that Santos does the same thing. Maybe a little bit of a long shot, but even if you have a 10, 20% chance, that's certainly something that we would not have anticipated from prior administrations. Trump has been pretty liberal when it comes to using this pardon power, so I would not be surprised if that's something that Santos's team works hard to try to secure.
So we know that July 25th, that's his report date there. We haven't really heard from him post-sentencing. He said yesterday to the Associated Press, he said this: "I'm doing as well as any human being would be doing given the circumstances." He says, "I'll be in court tomorrow, ready to face the music." Lastly on this point, and I have to add that, had Santos not become a member of Congress, had he not run for Congress, had he not been in the public eye at all, you could make the argument, couldn't you, Neama? None of this would have been explored or divulged.
No question. And sometimes people think who are watching that, rich and famous people or celebrities or elected officials, they get a free pass. And I argue that quite the contrary. Often they are prosecuted and investigated because of who they are, because they're held to a higher standard, because of the deterrent effect. So I'll give you an example. New York Attorney General Letitia James. Not to say that she's necessarily going to be prosecuted, but I think the chances of her being prosecuted are significant because of who she is, not because Trump and the DOJ want to get revenge, but, lying on a bank application is bank fraud. Not everyone gets prosecuted. People do it, but we saw Trump get prosecuted on one hand for making those types of statements. And I think she's likely going to be prosecuted too. If you or I did it, not to say that I would condone that, it's far less likely that we would be investigated or prosecuted. So I absolutely agree with you. I think Santos is a fair and just sentence, but I think people who are in Congress, who are in the public eye, they sometimes are held to a higher standard.
All right, Neama Rahmani, we're going to leave it at that. Have a great weekend. Talk soon.
Thanks, Andrew. You too.